Management Seminar event. And so according to the Center of Education, Recruitment and Retention Advancement latest supply and demand report, more than 7,300 South Carolina teachers left the position last year, and a little over 5,300 quit the profession altogether. Of those that left, 35% have 5 or fewer years of experience. So the media has dubbed the rising turnover, coupled with the declining number of completers of South Carolina education program, as the teacher shortage crisis. But South Carolina is not the only state facing teacher shortages, and the most recent estimates suggest that in 2017, the nation was short approximately 112,000 teachers of the demand, with an additional 109,000 individuals that were uncertified for the positions that they held. And so while there's some debate concerning whether or not a national teacher shortage truly does exist, there is more agreement over the fact that schools in certain geographic regions, especially high poverty urban and rural areas, not only face inequitable distribution of teacher quantity, but inequitable distribution of teacher quality across all commonly accepted metrics of quality, whether that's input or outcome-based metrics. But despite the fact that 1/3 of all American public schools are in rural areas, 1/5 of the students in the USA are attending rural schools. Research often neglects those issues in the country in favor of exploring issues in larger urban metro areas. And so given that our state is primarily rural and that the issues associated with rural educator turnover may differ than factors that are associated with urban turnover, the Center of Innovation Higher Education, and TCELI, which is a talent-centered education leadership initiative that I direct, with support from the South Carolina Education Policy Center and the UFC's College of Education, has invited a panel of scholars from across the nation to speak specifically on the issue of rural educator recruitment and retention. So we're going to start today, our first event, with the keynote talk by Dr. Richard Ingersoll, who is a professor of education and sociology at the University of Pennsylvania. His research concerned with the character of elementary and secondary schools at workplaces, teachers as employees, and teaching as a job. He's published over 100 articles, reports, and chapters and essays on the topic, including areas such as management and organization of schools, accountability and control in schools, teacher supply, demand, shortage, and turnover, induction and mentoring for beginning teachers, teacher preparation, teacher quality, the problem of unqualified teachers, the status of teaching as a profession, and changes in the demographic characters of the teaching workforce. Dr. Ingersoll will present the keynote talk for our Rural Talent Management Seminar, and without any further ado, Dr. Ingersoll.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. I've only been to South Carolina a couple times, but I used to be a professor at University of Georgia, which isn't that far, I don't think, and that was, I love that place. I was beloved. So, in any event, as Henry mentioned, I do research on elementary, secondary teacher supply, demand, shortages, etc. issues, and have been over the last, I hate to say this, 2 decades. We're getting older. All right. So, in any event, I'm going to present some data today on this huge problem that seems to be continuous and perennial, and that is teacher shortages. And I'm going to make the case that a lot of our understandings are not very accurate, and that we're operating with something of a wrong diagnosis and a wrong set of prescriptions when it comes to teacher shortages, and so hence they're never fixed, and they've been going on for half a century. In fact, one of my doctoral students did an online search, and it turns out almost every president since Eisenhower, at one point or another, gave a speech on teacher shortages. And lots of money has been spent, there's been all kinds of initiatives, but somehow we still have them. So that raises questions. In any event, the storyline hasn't changed much. And it sort of goes like this, that you've heard many times probably, that we have these 2 big demographic trends: increase in student enrollments, elementary, secondary student enrollments, increase in teacher retirements. These demographic trends are colliding. We simply don't have enough teachers. We have these shortages, particularly in subjects like math, science, and special education. That's the conventional wisdom. And the wrinkle in recent years is that enrollments have gone down in teacher preparation, teacher education programs, really since the 2008 recession. That's true. So the fix, the prescription, given the diagnosis that we have these shortages and that we do not make enough teachers, we have an undersupply. Of course, the fix is let's make more teachers. Let's have all kinds of initiatives to try to get college students to major in education and go into the classroom. And we have dozens of these, and have had dozens of these. I mean, some states have had signing bonuses, or tuition help, or housing allowances, those types of things. Some districts have recruited overseas. I remember talking to some people from Baltimore, Maryland School District. They were recruiting from the Philippines, teachers. Turns out that's a very expensive initiative to go over there, and fly people over, and help them get housing, etc. So there's tons and tons of initiatives out there. All kinds of things, federal level, state level, local level, to try to all operating under the assumption that we have these shortages because we don't make enough teachers. So I'm going to argue that if we closely look at the data, again, it's something of a wrong diagnosis and wrong solution. That the problem isn't so much that we don't make enough teachers as we lose too many. And so the fix can't simply be bringing more in. This is the short end of the story. We need to have better retention. And that if we really want to understand the staffing problems that schools have, we need to sort of look less at these larger macro demographic trends and start to look in schools and how they function and operate. Because I'm going to argue that's where the source of the problem is. So, a quick word on my data. Oh, I hope those in the back can see this. So I'm working analyzing national data from the U.S. Department of Education. This is a huge survey of teachers called the Schools and Staffing Survey. It was recently renamed to the National Teacher Principal Survey. I don't know why they did that, but anyhow, this is a huge survey, around 50,000 teachers. I mean, think of that sample size. So, before an election, Gallup can go and interview a couple thousand people and predict a presidential election down to a couple percentage points margin of error either way. This is a sample of around 50,000 teachers, all 50 states, etc., and also principals. And it's a gigantic source of information, and also this has been done since the late 1980s. So I'm able to look over 30 years and look at trends, which is really quite illuminating and enlightening. So the first thing, oh wait a minute, wrong direction. Okay. The first point to point out is that there is some truth to the conventional wisdom in the sense that student enrollments have gone up. That's the dotted line here, and this is from the late 1980s on up to 2015-16. The dotted line. And the teaching force has also grown in numbers. That's the solid line here. And the left vertical axis is the number of teachers, and the right vertical axis is the number of students. So yes, student enrollments have gone up, and numbers of employed teachers have gone up in this country. That is true. You can see that solid line sort of leveled off after 2008. That was a recession, and in fact, hiring stopped, and there was even some layoffs in some districts around the country, but it's picked up again with the benches. At the end of that solid line, increase in numbers of teachers. Hiring is up. So by the way, I'm assuming what that's going to mean is enrollments in teacher education and preparation programs are also going to go up, and we're trying to look at those data. So one of the big takeaways from this slide is that the teaching force is going up faster than the student population in this country. That's very interesting. In fact, double the rate, over double the rate. That raises all kinds of questions, which I'm not going to talk about hardly at all today. We could talk about it in our question and answer session. Why is it, there's the why question, why is the number of employed teachers going up at double the rate the number of students in schools in this country? That's a huge question. You can imagine some answers to that, class size reduction, huge increase in bilingual English as a second language, and also special education. So there's some answers to that. And then there's also the implications, the affordability issue, which I'm not an ed finance person, but I'm really wondering if this is a ticking time bomb, and how can the biggest line item in any school district budget are teacher salaries. So how can the number of teachers go up faster than students? How is this going to be paid for? And I'm sort of wondering. This can't continue. But that's sort of another issue we could talk about. The takeaway here is simply that, yes, students and teachers are going up. So what about shortages? The most accurate indicator we have of teacher shortages is You go to principals and you say, how many positions did you have in a given subject? And how much difficulty did you have filling them? This is the most concrete indicator of shortages, staffing problems. And we have national data here, and I'll take a moment to explain this graph. So, it's by subject matter, and it's secondary schools across the country. And I should also add that I'm presenting national picture. Whether this storyline applies to South Carolina, that's an open thing we could discuss. I don't know that. There could be lots of variations. So the purple bars is percentage of schools that had a vacancy in a field. So we can see that 45% of the schools, and this is the 15-16 year, had vacancies in mathematics. They had openings. They wanted to hire a math teacher. And then we can see that just under half of that, 17% of all secondary schools, they had serious difficulties filling those vacancies in math. So it's significant numbers of schools, and math and science and special ed are at the top here, in terms of that brown, light brown tan bar, hiring difficulties. But note, it's not all schools, it's not the majority of schools, and it's not all subjects have shortages. So we need to kind of take the shortage discussion and start to sort of bring it down, like, what are we talking about here? We're talking about some schools and some subjects have had serious hiring difficulties. And note at the bottom, no one has problems hiring English and social studies teachers. Well, 3% of schools. And that's not surprising, that's not a new finding. I was a social studies teacher way back when, a high school teacher. It was difficult to get a job. It was, and that's still true. Okay, so yes, there's some shortages out there in the sense that principals tell us in some fields, in some schools, they're having trouble filling some of their positions. But at this point, this is where the conventional wisdom about shortages and the data start to diverge. So, first let's talk about where hires come from. What are the sources of supply of teachers? The typical assumption is it's the pipeline. It's fresh graduates from teacher ed and teacher prep programs. That's what everyone wants to look at. That's where we get our teachers from. No, it's not. In fact, that pipeline of fresh graduates of teacher ed, teacher prep programs is actually a small slice of everyone hired in the schools every year. So, let's go here. All right. So, the red slice of the pie is the percentage of all those hired in to schools in the 2015-16 school year came from the pipeline of colleges of education and teacher ed programs. 25%, only a quarter of those hired. The blue and the yellow, these are people that got something other than an education degree. They might have gotten both an ed degree and a math degree or a history degree. They got some combination. The blue is those who didn't get an ed degree at all. And that's another 19%. The biggest source of supply of new hires is the green, huge slice here. And I know you probably can't read it. It says reserve pool. That's 56%. The reserve pool is former teachers that loop back in, or it's people that went and got a certificate or an ed degree or whatever, never did it, and a few years went by, and then they're what we call delayed entrants. They come into teaching. So think of this. The conventional wisdom is we don't make enough new teachers. The conventional wisdom only focuses, for the most part, on that red slice of the pie and concludes, gosh, we don't make enough teachers. But they haven't looked at all the other sources. This is just a huge continuing problem with sort of the discussion around shortages. Ed, you had a clarification question.
What's the data source?
This is the same data source, Schools and Staffing Survey, national data.
Okay, just wanted to make sure it was in SAS.
Yeah, all this is in that first slide, Schools and Staffing Survey. Okay, so if you want to figure out if the supply of teachers is sufficient, you've got to look at all the sources to make that determination. You can't just look at that green, I don't know what those leaves are, but you can't just look at that red slice of the pie. But also, besides that, well, what we find is that if we do look at all the slices of the pie, or the supply pie, it turns out we actually do make enough teachers. and we quantified this, even in mathematics and science, I know this is heresy, we make enough qualified teachers to keep up with student enrollment increases and to keep up with teacher retirements. We do. We do. But what we don't make enough new teachers to cover is pre-retirement, voluntary quitting, departing, attrition, whatever. So we cover retirement, we cover student enrollment increases, even in math and science. The catch is those who quit before retirement, leave their school, leave teaching altogether. It turns out, this is sort of the missing piece of the puzzle. Teaching is a high turnover, high quit, high depart line of work. Let's illustrate this. This shows of a number of different occupations and professions, college graduates from '93 who went into these different lines of work, and how many were gone after 10 years. So and gone from the occupation or the profession altogether. So it's attrition across a number of different lines of work. The highest is secretaries. So college grads who become secretaries, almost 80% of them are gone from secretarial world within 10 years. And then child care workers, paralegals, and correctional officers, prison guards. Those are very high turnover, high quit lines of work. And then teachers. We were sort of surprised to see that teachers were even a little higher than police. I kind of assumed that police work is often high-stress work, and I kind of expected them to have really, really high quit rates from that line of work. And, you know, they do relatively, but teachers are even higher. Teachers are higher than nurses. Teachers are far higher in their quit rates after 10 years than all kinds of traditional professions. The ones we got here were architects, lawyers, engineers. Teachers quit at about double the rate of college professors. That's another source of data. It's not here. So it's a high quit line of work. Now, by the way, you know, when you're running data and you have some interesting finding, you kind of wonder, well, why is that? And you don't know, and you make a little note. So maybe some of you know, but pharmacy, no one quits pharmacy. It's the bottom one there. Only 14% quit after 10 years. So I have no idea, I know nothing about the pharmacy occupation profession, but they don't quit. And some of you might have some hypotheses. I know one of you is going to make a joke about maybe it has to do with the pharmaceuticals they have access to. I wouldn't want to say that, I didn't say that, I don't know. But it's just interesting, pharmacy, those people don't quit. Some of you may know why. You may have a spouse who's a pharmacist. In any event, teaching is relatively high quit line of work from this. And the next slide tries to capture the concept of the revolving door. So this is sort of my graphics work. Let me walk through it. So at the beginning of the 11-12 school year, the yellow arrow, just over 1/3 people came into schools. They got a job in a school, they hadn't been in that school the year before. And this is public schools, and there's 3 1/3 million in the teaching force, and then 10-12 months later, the sort of orangish bar, over 500,000 left their schools, left their buildings. Note that that's larger than the amount coming in. So if we take those two arrows, the 343,000 to 531,000, and we add them up, it turns out that over a quarter of this gigantic line of work, teaching, are in job transition, moving into, between, or out of schools every year. So in this one, I'm not just counting those who get out of teaching altogether, I'm also counting those who move between different schools. Think of that. So I should back up and say that when we look in census, elementary, secondary teaching is either the largest or one of the largest occupations in the nation. It's gigantic. If you throw in private school teachers, it's around 4 million. So, for instance, there's 5 times as many teachers as either professors or lawyers. There's twice as many teachers as nurses, which is another large line of work. It's a gigantic, we often don't recognize it's a gigantic occupation. There's a lot of teachers. And so over a quarter of them are in job transition each and every year. This is is a lot of movement. This is a lot of flow. It's going to have effects. It's huge. I'm just sort of trying to capture the magnitude of transition within this gigantic occupation. Yes?
Does the turnover figure include retirements?
Yes, that's everyone who leaves the building.
Okay.
They might be going to another school, they might be retiring, they might be becoming a professor, they might be becoming a banker, who knows? All those things. All those departures, it's sort of all-inclusive. For all kinds of reasons, good and bad. Yes. So it's a very high-flow line of work, and this is each year. Now, there's no assumption that all this job transition and turnover is bad. No, not at all. Look, there's some people we want them to turn over. You know, in any line of work, certainly in academia. I better take that back.
We edited up the recording.
That's right, it's being recorded. So, you know, it's not all bad. Employee turnover in general, and in fact, the whole topic of employee turnover, attrition, job transition, etc., is a huge subject in business schools. A huge research literature, particularly management departments. People study this. And I have colleagues that get very fancy consulting contracts with insurance industry. We want to know the cost of employee turnover in our industry because management wants to know this.
Yeah.
There's some acknowledgement it's not cost-free. And the two general findings in this large literature are, one, not all employee turnover is bad. In fact, the good firm, and there's a whole literature, the good firm both promotes and benefits from some degree of employee turnover. You want fresh blood coming in, you want your low performers hopefully to move out. On the other hand, there's a recognition that high levels of employee turnover are not cost-free. And there's all kinds of research on sort of what are the costs and consequences, financial, workplace, culture, all kinds of consequences if you have rates of employee turnover. It's very interesting. When I first started doing this research, I could find nothing other than some essays about the costs and consequences of teacher turnover. It just wasn't studied. It wasn't studied. I mean, people would make claims, they'd say it's terrible, or they'd say it's good, or whatever. Both the costs and the benefits, the pros and cons, of what's a high turnover line of work. I mean, it's sort of interesting, and we've now had a growing body of research. I've just jotted down a couple of things here. So my contribution is to sort of tie, and I'm going to get to this, tie one of the consequences of teacher turnover are the shortages. It's really the big driver. But we also have a couple studies showing that these schools that sort of have chronically high teacher turnover, that harms student achievement. I had a PhD student that did this on New York City data. There's literature talking about that it's very disruptive for school cohesion. This is not an assembly line where you can just plug someone in. The teaching takes a lot of cooperation and teamwork between teachers, and if there's people moving in and out every year, it's really disruptive. I mean, picture this. Let's suppose you're in a big high school and there's a math department of 6 math teachers, and let's suppose a couple of them quit. Key people in your department quit. That just sort of throws a monkey around, and let's suppose you just enacted a whole new math curriculum and reform. Turnover can have negative, it's not all bad, it can have negative consequences. And it certainly takes a huge amount of time and money for human resource departments just to constantly bring in more people. The cost, we were talking about this last night, sort of the costs of job fairs. You send representatives from the HR department out across different states to do these job fairs, and there's some expense there. Does it pay off, sort of thing, and how to assess that? So there's a lot of costs and consequences, and in this high turnover line of work, we're finally starting to recognize this. All right. But also, and you won't be surprised, the rate at which the revolving door revolves varies. It varies amongst types of teachers, it varies amongst types of schools. And so, you probably heard these figures, we generated these first a couple decades ago, that almost 50% of those who go into teaching are gone within 5 years. And we now have more than one data set that has sort of verified that. Very high quit rates. And this isn't people moving to other schools. This is getting out of teaching altogether. So after 5 years, these are national data, about 45% are gone. That dipped a little in the recession, and I had these colleagues that sort of jumped on that and said, oh, the problem beginning teacher turnover is gone and it's all fixed. Well, it's gone back up again after a few years. Very high quit rates amongst beginners in teaching. Think of the costs there. I mean, I'm one of those, and we have some research showing that, you get better in those first few years. Most of us get better, hopefully. And so, a lot of these people are quitting before they've had a chance to get really good at it. High school teaching is the most difficult job I ever had in my life, and it takes a while to learn how to deal with all the things you need to deal with, sort of thing. And so you're losing a lot of people before they've had a chance to get good. I mean, that's sort of one of the costs of this. The other finding, and you won't be surprised by this, is that revolving, first, trends over time. So this is annual turnover rates of teachers, and over the last, 25 years or something, and it's not going down. It's bouncing around a little. Annual rates. This is everybody. These turnover rates. So the problem's not going away. And also, I was going to say, there's huge differences amongst types of schools, and you won't be surprised by this. So, this is 2012, 2013 data. They're a little dated, but it's the most recent turnover data we have for teachers. The average for public schools is 16% have left that building per year. There's rural, suburban, urban differences. Urban's a little higher here. Just hold that thought for a minute. Rural's not quite as high as urban here. Then there's big differences according to the percentage of students in the building who are minority, the percentage from low-income, poverty-level families. The 22% annual turnover for high poverty. Now, when we combine a couple of these, and this is relevant for this meeting and this conference, the highest high poverty rural schools. On average, across the country, they're losing a quarter of their teachers each and every year. I mean, just think of that as a principal. It just sort of tires me out to think of all the interviewing and hiring each and every year. And that's the average. There's a whole variance here, up to 40% a year sort of thing, and lower. And note this, the high poverty rural schools have higher teacher turnover than the high poverty urban. Now that's an interesting finding, because in the research world, everyone wants to focus on urban poor. Henry used the term metrocentric sort of thinking. We're assuming that's the big problems, is the urban poor school districts. And yes, they do have problems. My university's in Philadelphia, and it's got so many problems. But the idea that there's a neglect of this large number of schools that are rural and that are high poverty. That's an important thing to focus on, that 25%. What is behind that? What are the reasons for that? The why question. And that's my next couple of slides here. All right. These are what's called self-report data. Teachers are asked. Okay, the survey's done 1 year, and they come back and they find out all the teachers who were originally surveyed who have left, and they track them down, and where are you, and what are you doing, and what are the reasons why you departed that school. And it's interesting, and I broke it down by everyone, and then the blue is rural. And these are sort of clumps of reasons. And it's self-report data, that is, you're asked and you tell. Now you might say, well, isn't that a little bit subjective? How valid? I mean, exit interviews, the boss asks you why you're leaving, are notorious for what we call validity issues that you may not feel you can be frank. Look, boss, I'm leaving because you're awful. Who's going to say that if they need a recommendation, etc.? This is a national survey, it's anonymous, it's confidential, etc. So we have some confidence. Retirement. Rural's a little bit higher than everyone else here. That's the top one. Now this is an interesting finding. So those top bars, I left a major reason why I departed that school is retirement. It's a relatively, they're not the longest bars. And that's an interesting finding. The conventional wisdom is we have this gray hair crisis, this aging teaching force. This is driving the shortages, etc. Well, it's a piece. You know, it's around a fifth. Say that retirement's a major reason. But it's overshadowed by these other clumps of reasons. So the next set of bars, school staffing action. This is where, and this is really the case in large urban districts where school closes, involuntary transfers, terminations, firings, all those things where it's often involuntary. The administration may do it, teachers are shuffled around, teachers are fired, and that's much smaller in rural schools than in the other schools, school staffing actions. And that's, you know, that's sort of maybe part of life in big districts. There's a lot of, teachers are shuffled around, they're transferred, etc. Budget cuts, you've got to lay off the beginning teachers, that sort of thing. The middle set of bars, family or personal. I left my school because health issues, wanted to raise children, care for elderly folks, spouse moved to another state, you know, these kinds of reasons. And you can see that's something over 40%. Rural's a little higher here than everyone else. And you know, these are neither good nor bad. You know, any line of work, people have to move from their firm, their organization, their workplace for all kinds of reasons. A lot of times it's what we're calling these family or personal reasons. I don't know that it's higher in teaching than any other line of work. That's a big chunk. So the fourth set down, I departed that school because I wanted to pursue another job, a better career, etc. And rural's a little higher there. I wanted to do other things. And then the last set of bars, the longest set, I departed that school because I was not happy with it. I was dissatisfied. And for rural, that's the longest bar on the chart. Over 61%, just over 61% of those high rates of teacher turnover in rural schools say a major reason was dissatisfaction. Now, someone's going to point out, well, Richard, these add up to more than 100%. Yes, you can put more than one reason. We all, you know, those of us who've left jobs, we might have 3 or 4 reasons. We maybe, you know, prioritize them or rank them. There's different reasons. Sometimes people retire, but they also retire early because they're dissatisfied. So you could give multiple reasons. But note, the major factor behind the high rates of turnover in the teaching occupation is dissatisfaction. That's a finding. That's a finding. So then you're going to ask, what are they dissatisfied with? I can think, I'm a former teacher, I can think of 100 things. When I taught, there was a staff room, and back then you could smoke cigarettes, and you know, you go in the staff room between periods and it was filled with smoke. And look, this is just a couple high schools I was in, but it was kind of a venting, I don't want to say whining, that's negative. It was a complaint space. You're between periods, you just had some bad experience with your 5th period class, and you know, you had World War III, and you go and your colleagues are all puffing cigarettes like crazy, and everyone had a lot of complaints. And they're all over the map. You know, it's the principal, it's the board, it's the parents, it's the students. A lot of complaints. So when I first started doing this research, I thought, well, the survey's asking teachers, of those who checked dissatisfaction, what were the things that dissatisfied you? And I expected it to be, you know, all over the map. Well, yes and no. Okay, and I know this is too small for the back, perhaps. These are the major reasons they gave. And again, the red top bar is all teachers, and the blue one is teachers in rural schools. and the percentages. That of those who said, I departed that building, a major reason was dissatisfaction, here's what I was dissatisfied with. All right. Over half dissatisfied with accountability and testing. And this one really jumped after NCLB, No Child Left Behind Act, was enacted. The sort of testing and accountability, this one sort of came up as a source of dissatisfaction year after year. The second one, and this is the longest one for rural, dissatisfied with administration. 63% of teachers that departed rural schools. Now, this is the thing about these large-scale survey questionnaires. This is too vague for me. Dissatisfied with administration. What does that mean? What about the administration? I'm on the review, the oversight. We want to reword this question. Okay, you didn't like the administration, but that doesn't tell us much. Okay, the next one is a really important one for me. I do a lot of research on it. It's the issue of teacher voice, teacher input into decision making, sort of discretion within the classroom and school-wide decisions. This is very strongly related to retention and turnover. How much say do the teachers in the building have over the decisions that affect them? You know, is it a top-down management model where you're sort of told what to do, maybe micromanaged with a highly scripted curriculum, or can you have a lot of say in those things? And this is a real big one, and schools vary dramatically on this one. And it turns out, you know, this is highly related to retention and turnover. Classroom intrusions is just around 50%. You know, in a lot of these, there's not big differences between rural and everyone else. Salaries and benefits, which is second to the bottom, the rural teachers are a little more likely to put that one. And my guess is that salaries and benefits are often lower in rural areas. Depends. The smallest one, or the least frequent source of dissatisfaction for rural teachers, is class size is too large. That's less than a fifth. You put that down. Now, these are interesting because of sort of what they imply. And let's go back to that conventional wisdom. We have teacher shortages. It's mainly a supply side problem. We don't make enough of these new teachers. And we need to recruit more people in, and we need fellowships and programs, and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and that all makes sense. But the data are pointing out that, well, no, it's not so much that we don't make enough, it's that we're losing too many. And these reasons we lose too many are what we might call policy amenable. They could be fixed ostensibly. No one's saying it's easy. I mean, you can't necessarily change poverty levels, but you could change classroom intrusions. I mean, when I taught, the loudspeaker would go up in the middle of my class and throw me off and stuff like that. So, you know, some of these are very sort of actionable, is another term often used. So in other words, instead of sort of these inexorable demographic trends, student enrollment increases, teacher retirement increases, that's a conventional wisdom. The data start pointing more in here in schools in the sense that we have a lot of working conditions which are not very great, and it's driving out large numbers from some schools, not all schools, and that's sort of behind, a big story behind these shortages. I mean, think what a different diagnosis we have here. And this gets us to prescriptions. All right. As President Obama did this initiative a few years ago now, and some of you may have heard of it, and I was asked to speak on this. So in 2010, the federal 100K in 10 initiative. And the idea was federal government is going to put a lot of money, fellowships, etc. It's going to recruit 10,000 new math science teachers per year for 10 years. So it's going to come up for next year, and I want to see what the evaluation is. And you know what my prediction is? It probably did a great job bringing in math science people. And then I'm going to ask, well, how many are still there? In other words, recruitment's great, but if we don't have retention, where are we? So, I just generated some data here. So this was started in 2010. But between 2012 and 2013 alone, over 40,000 math science teachers left teaching altogether. So the President's initiative, 10,000 new math science teachers into schools a year. Well, we're losing, in this one year, we lost over 40,000 in 1 year. Of them, less than 9,000, less than 10,000 was retirement. Most of it is pre-retirement voluntary departures. Totally sort of ruins the President's initiative for people to come in and then a few years leave. And so the image that always comes to mind to me, having a backyard and being a gardener, you got the old bucket, it's got some holes in the bottom, and you're pouring water until you notice the thing's not filling. Oh my God, it's pouring out the bottom. So I sort of, took this metaphor. Most of our initiatives are about bringing more people into teaching. Who could be against the President's initiative to bring in college math science majors into teaching? That's a terrific idea. But it's not going to solve anything if a lot of them are gone. Remember that earlier slide, 40 to 50% are gone within 5 years. In fact, it's not only not going to solve it, a lot of investment has been lost. Some of these fellowship programs are pretty costly. Pretty costly. So, the question is, to follow this metaphor, how can we get some mud, some glue, to patch some of the holes in the bottom of the bucket, to slow down the quit rate, the departure rate, so that we didn't have to continually every year hire tons of more teachers. In this case, math science. So I'm going to finish. I think I'm okay time-wise. I'm going to finish by talking about sort of two sets of reforms that I've done research on and we have promising results that show that they're promising for improving retention, sort of concrete things. All right. One of them is providing some support. The term often used is induction for beginning teachers. So remember that earlier slide, 44% of beginners are gone within 5 years. What can we do about that? And a lot. All right. So, this is a reform, and I do not know about South Carolina, that has happened. Okay, let me back up. When I was a high school teacher, we had what was called the sink or swim model. You got the job. The principal handed me my keys to the classroom, gave me a pat on the back, and that was it. I must have been evaluated at some point. I don't know that I ever saw him again. You're on your own. That was the model. You're on your own, and some swim and some sink. And at the end of the day, sometimes when I'd had some horrific experience in class, I would seek out some veteran teacher and say, listen, can we take 15 minutes? Could you give me some advice? I got to go back to that class tomorrow, and frankly, I'm sort of clueless how to handle it. So there's been a general recognition that this is a problem. This is many occupations and professions sort of, induct their new members. They might have, they might be interns, they might have mentors, etc. And so this has been a reform that's happened in teaching, and sort of this is percentage of beginners in public schools that got some kind of support. And it was 50% back in the early 90s, and it's up now to 89%. Lots of states have done this. California had something called the BITSA program, but although I'm told that the BITSA programs disappeared. Peter?
I'm thinking back to your other graph that had the attrition rates, the 5-year attrition rates, and how constant they were. So how do we think about, these are possibly programs, right?
Yes. So you're getting at the question of, do they do anything?
Well, does this speak also to the quality of the mentors? Just because you have something doesn't mean it's
Yes,
useful.
another good point. We can all picture getting some veteran senior teacher that would drive us up. I mean, the people that designed these, in fact, there's a group in California called the New Teacher Center. They're a major designer and purveyor. And one of their, lessons they learned was that not all senior teachers make good mentors. You have to do some thoughtful selection of just who you have advising the beginners. But you're raising a good point. We'll get to that a little bit. So this is a reform that's happened, and what do they get? Here's the 15-16 data. Here's the most common things those first-year teachers get. Regular contact with an administrator. Some face time with the principal or the vice principal. You might say, this is a support? Well, back to my experience, I never had a conversation with a principal you're on your own. So hopefully this contact would be constructive. But this is just, did you have any kind of non-ad hoc but structured contact with an administrator? And 80% of the beginning teachers said yes. Did you get a senior teacher who served as your mentor? 80%, 81% yes. Nothing about the quality of this, back to Henry's point, this is just on a survey questionnaire, did you get these kinds of supports, yes, no. Seminars for beginners. So maybe the district has an orientation for a day or two. Philadelphia School District now has this for all the beginning teachers, and sort of here's our rules and policies and programs, and sort of to help you kind of learn the ropes, so to speak. Common planning time with colleagues, just under 2/3. This isn't ad hoc, this is structured. So if you're a brand new social studies teacher, is it up to you to make any contact with the other social studies teachers, or is there some kind of structured time where you're integrated in with them? When I did it, you were on your own, and so, but now this is a much more common time, common thing where it's structured. And it turns out this is a very important one when I get to the question of the effects. Very few get an assistant or aide in their classroom. And very, very few get a reduced teaching load. I'm not quite sure how that would work at the elementary level, but at the secondary level, I guess the idea was that you'd have one less preparation or one less course. You'd get a course reduction each day or each week or something. Now, interestingly, I've only worked at 2 universities, but in both of them, beginning professors get a course reduction. They get 1 course off their first year. I think that's common in higher ed. I don't know if it's here at the University of South Carolina. It's not common in lower ed. It's very, very few get that. So these are the main sort of supports one could get. But it also turns out these are not isolated things. They come in packages. A district or a school offers sort of a few of them. And so we did some statistical analyses where you look at clusters. You take the beginning teachers and you see sort of what clumps and packages these come in. And this was an analysis I did with Tom Smith, who was at Vanderbilt and is now at University of California, Riverside. And there's 3 main packages and clumps we found. The first one we call basic, and over 60% of the beginners got this. Just 2 things. You got a mentor, senior teacher is your mentor, and you got some face time with an administrator. And that's all you got. And this is the most common one. It's thin. It's thin. More common, just under 1/3 of your less common, just under 1/3 of beginners got 4 things. They got a mentor, and importantly, the mentor was from their own grade or field. So if you were an English teacher, your mentor was an English teacher. They weren't a physics teacher. You get face time with the administration. There's some structured collaboration time with teachers in your department or your grade. And you got beginner seminars. That's sort of a middle package. And then the rich package, I guess we could call it the Lexus. This costs money. You got 6 things. You got all those things in the prior chart. You got, mentor, face time, collaboration time, beginner seminars, plus you got reduced preparations, plus you got a teacher in. This is a comprehensive package. Only 2% of beginners in the country get this. It's costly, I'm sure. So then, Peter's question, or a variant of Peter's question is, this all may be well and fine, but does it make any difference? So Tom Smith and I decided to use the national data and sort of do advanced statistical analyses. Is there any effects of getting these? And the outcome we wanted to look at was retention. If you got this stuff, and if you got more of this stuff, you're more likely to stick around, or not. I mean, it might be a nice thing to do, but let's do some empirical work to see if it has any positive effects. And let's see here. Here's what we found. No induction, the top bar. That's the old sink or swim model. You get nothing. That's what I had as a teacher. And this is just after 1 year, 41% of those people are gone from that building. About half moved to another school, and about half got out of teaching altogether. That's stunning. This is just after 1 year. We couldn't follow on a long time with these data. Over 40% are gone. But these days, only a small percentage of the beginning teachers get nothing at all. That's actually pretty rare. The basic model, remember that was, you got a mentor and you got some face time with the administrator. That buys you very little retention. It drops from 41 to 39%. If you do induction light, I don't want to say it's a waste of money, but it doesn't get you much. Basic and collaboration, that was where you got 4 things, right? Mentor, face time, collaboration time, beginner seminars. That reduces the total turnover, which is split between movers and leavers, to 27%. You can see there's a story here, and I think it's pretty straightforward. Is the more rich the package, the better retention you get. I mean, sort of like the more money you spend, the better you get. That's my takeaway here. And then the bottom one, remember, that's the Lexus, where you got all 6 things. It reduces total turnover to 18%, and the levers is in the single digits. It's less than 10%. But remember, only 2% of beginners get that, probably because it's expensive. I'm assuming it's expensive. I've never been able to get actual prices on these packages. Some people have done some work on that. So, the takeaway is that there's been a big growth in support programs for beginning teachers. It varies dramatically what these teachers get. And these data, national data, suggests that the more you get, so to speak, kind of thing. And I should say, this is sort of advanced analyses where we do these multivariate analyses, and we control for the characteristics of the teachers and the characteristics of the school, sort of net of all that. If you got these things, what's your likelihood of being around for a second year? We felt strong findings, sort of ammunition for supply induction. Although these different things have different price tags too. But then you might say, okay, Richard, teacher retention is important, and we buy your argument that it's behind shortages, but that's just one outcome. Does this stuff improve student achievement? Everyone's bottom line. So a colleague of mine and I did a lit review. Gosh, lit reviews are so time-consuming because there's thousands. So empirical studies of the effects of induction and mentoring. So your first take, online search, and all this. There's thousands of pieces, and then you got to whittle it down to those with data. Well, that whittles it right down, way, way, way down. I mean. Some are essays and some are sort of descriptive reports, or some of them are prescriptive reports, but actually analyses with data. And then analyses where the typical study would be, you go in and do a focus group with beginning teachers that got some induction or support, and you ask them, how was it? Was it worthwhile? But you just talk to them. We wanted research, we have a comparison. Beginning teachers that got induction, beginning teachers that got nothing, so you could do a comparison. Well, that brought it down to very few studies. And we were surprised at the support for this initiative. It's very interesting because, typically in education, some studies show positive effects, some show no effects, some show negative effects. It's charter schools, are they good or bad? It's going to be all over the map. It's very frustrating to legislators, by the way, the lack of consensus we have, those of us who do research on education. Professor Ingersoll, will you just tell us what works? Wow, one study shows this, one study shows that. Could you go home back to your university. We were so surprised in this case that almost all the studies showed positive effects. And I just saw, oh no, okay, well first, let me back up. I jumped ahead a little. When Tom Smith and I did that analysis, these were the two things that had the biggest effect on beginning teacher retention. Having a mentor from your same field and the common planning time. Those were sort of the big, because people say, well, Richard, of all those items, which ones seem to be the best as far as retention? These two stood out. So then on to my thing about Michael Strong and I did this whole review, and we whittled it down to 15 what we thought were the most solid empirical studies. They all had issues, which we would sort of talk about in this review article. And there was different outcomes they looked at. Sometimes it's teacher retention. Sometimes it was your practices, your classroom practices. You know, they'd have some rubric, the quality of their instruction, and then student achievement. And one of these was actually a randomized controlled study. You know, you were randomly assigned. That was a big one, funded by the Department of Education. So they randomly selected schools, and beginners in this school got the treatment, the comprehensive induction package, and these schools, beginners didn't. And almost all the studies showed strong positive effects. It was interesting, but they also showed that it's back to the thing about the sort of, the more you do, the more you get. For instance, the study where schools were randomly picked for the beginners to get induction, they found that yes, it had positive effects on student achievement. Teachers that got the induction, their students in both math and reading did better, but only after 2 years of the induction. In other words, one lesson was you sort of can't do it on the skinny side. You've got to do a little more comprehensive package, and you've got to do it for a couple of years. Otherwise, it's not that you're wasting your money, but it's sort of halfway. That was an interesting takeaway we had. So, you know, positive effects. Now what we need is, and this was, I think, someone's point about costs. We need someone to come in and say, all right, we found positive effects, but what's the bang for buck? Because all these programs cost money and the comprehensive ones cost money. I've never done that research. But legislators want to know. They'll say, okay, it has positive effects, but you know, there's a big price tag here, and we can only budget so much. And so Professor Ingersoll, you know, which is the best bang for buck? Is it the one in Texas that Ed has studied? Is it the bits in California? Because those have very different price tags. That research is dying to be done. I think it takes someone who knows about ed finance or something. I don't have the skills quite to do the cost-benefit analysis. I think economists, I think they're taught that. So any economists here?
I'm pointing to my golf student, he's doing cost analysis for his dissertation.
I'm pointing at you.
And I'm listening.
So, okay. So, back to my point about, I wanted to talk about two types of initiatives that we've done research on that show positive effects on retention. And one of them is this whole support for beginning teachers. And the second one is, and this is an area that's very important to me, it's the whole issue of teachers having some say in decisions, some voice. You know, when you go back and read the ed historians, this is a century-long plaint. Teachers would like more say. You can go back in these historical accounts, 1920s, you know, teachers should have more say in how the building is run, and so it's been this sort of desire and aspiration for a century. But it turns out, no, unlike professors, teachers often, usually, have very little input. Maybe a little more sometimes into decisions within their own classroom. Often very little in building-wide decisions. It's a top-down management model, and there could be some advantages to that. So I'm very interested in this issue that if teachers have more voice, maybe it's a nice thing, but does it actually, empirically, does it have any kind of impact, positive or negative, on some of these outcomes? That's sort of, that's a whole stream of research I've been doing. It just personally interests me. And we've done a bunch. Wait a minute. There, okay. This slide shows, it asks teachers, how much influence do the teachers in the building have over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 decisions?